Hi, good evening. This is Jane at Rockin' Worms, and what I'm going to show you tonight is a second method of dealing with castings in your bin that have become a little sticky. They become sticky because the worms have reprocessed the castings several times, and that happens when you're not able to remove castings earlier in your bin life, and the worms are kind of going back and re-eating their castings and doing that cycle a couple times. That process makes the castings sticky and more difficult to sift out. The video that I just uploaded a few days ago showed you one way I'm dealing with that situation in a number of my bins, and I had a couple more bins I have to deal with. And this bin right here in front of me is the very next bin I took off the shelf, and it turns out that I can use it to show you the alternative way to deal with sticky castings that I mentioned in that other video. So the second way to deal with sticky castings is to mix in dry material or dry-ish material all through your bin, and that will help redistribute any excess moisture as well as reduce the stickiness of the castings. Or at least that's what I've been told by my worm friends who have used this process to deal with their situations in their bins, but I have not yet used it myself. So I am going to do this as an experiment, and you and I will together see how this works. Now, this is going to be basically, setting it up where I'm going to end up mixing the drier ingredients into the worm bin, and then I'm going to monitor it, for a week or 10 days, or I don't know how long, it might be, shorter or longer. And then we'll see what the end result is on the castings and whether or not this method of mixing in drier bedding, and again, I'm going to be using my pre-compost, but perhaps you use coconut coir or peat moss or dried pulverized leaves, something like that. They would all work. You could use some sawdust, for an example. One of my subscribers mentioned that he has some sawdust, and he was wondering if that was okay to use in the worm bin, which it is. So, sawdust would work as well. So what I'm doing here is I'm just aerating the bin, the castings. I would call it bedding, but you can see, just how much this is castings. And it's beautiful stuff, but you can tell that it's just not gonna sift through very well, and it is a little, sticky. I mean, I know you can't see that, but I can feel it, all right? So I'm thinking that the best way to mix in dry bedding into this bin is to aerate it first, and then I am going to mix in handfuls, because that way I'll be able to do sections at a time and adjust how much of the pre-composted bedding I'm putting in here, and just kind of go by sight and by feel and say, you know what, I need some more, or that's enough, or I actually have too much, and then I can, spread it down more into the bin until I get an idea of what it feels like. Now, like I said, I personally haven't done this before, this particular method. I generally use the method that I showed in the video that I uploaded previously, which I'll link down in the description. So I am figuring this out. And so far I'm not really seeing or feeling that it's drying down, but let's give it a couple of minutes, because it will have to, give it a little time to start acting on the bin contents, these castings. All right. What I'm also going to do is right at the end is I'm going to give them a feed as well, small feed, so I can start luring these worms down to the working end of the bin. So if and when this mix-in works, I'll be that much closer to being able to sift out the castings. You might have noticed that when I mixed up the bin contents that there was no visible feed, food left. And I did feed them last on July 6th, which was 12 days ago. So they are due for another feed. And I also think that's why, the worms were distributed all through the bin. Again, you might have noticed that when I was aerating the bin. So I do want to start migrating, doing a horizontal migration to pull the worms from one end of the bin down as much as possible to the opposite end of the bin, so it will aid in sifting out. Now, I think I'm going to stop adding in any additional of my bedding mix at this point. One, because it does feel a little bit lighter, I guess. And that's just because there's, I think more of the compost in it, of course. But also, the other reason I'm going to stop is I've pretty much reached my limit, what I prefer as far as the volume in the bin goes. Like I mentioned on the last video, I like to stop at this ridge, because once I get above this ridge, which is in the 2.5 to 3 inch range, I thought it was a little bit shallower, but it looks like it's more like the 2.5 to 3 inch range. After I get past that, the bin gets too full for me to work in it comfortably, as far as not, flinging the bedding everywhere, but also to keep the bin in the weight limit that is more comfortable for me to manage. So I'm gonna say this is close enough, is good enough, and let's see what happens. Now, so I do want to, like I said, do a little trench feeding down here at the working end of the bin, so I can lure some of these worms down. Okay, let me get a napkin. I forgot to grab that earlier. Let me put that in. Oh, 2 napkins. I only need 1. Save that for another bin, because I have 2 more bins to do. Let me put that in. This is my fast food lettuces that were previously frozen, and now they're mostly defrosted. I'm squeezing out excess water because the last thing I need to do, oh, your little worm coming to check it out, see if there's any good food for it in here. Last thing I need to do is be adding more moisture into the bin. I do not want to be doing that. So squeezing out excess water from my defrosted vegetables seems like a good thing to do for me. All right, so that's that. I'm gonna give them a little bit of worm chow, again, to, entice them down to this end of the bin. And then I'm gonna add in my normal amendments, a little azomite for micronutrients, micro minerals, which are good for the worms, good for the garden. They can also use it as grit, a little dolomite lime, agricultural lime for pH balancing. They can also use that for grit. And now I'm just gonna cover this up. You always wanna cover, just as a reminder, if you're using food scraps in particular, you always wanna cover it up when you're done, because it reduces the smell coming out of the bin of the food as it decomposes. and that means you're less likely to draw in external pests like flies and gnats and cockroaches and spiders and other things. So always cover your food. Okay, this is actually pretty much it. I am going to take the cover that I took off in the beginning. Let me get the little dregs that came off of the newspaper. Just wasn't too much. Scrape that out just in case there's any wisps in there. Get everybody back into their bin. Let's see what the newspaper looks like. That's in pretty good shape. Here's some more worms on the top. They do like to hang out on the newspaper because of the moisture. They also like to eat the newspaper. So it's a twofer for them. Moisture and food that they particularly like. All right. So quick and easy. I'm going to put their cover back on, and I'm going to put it back on the shelf. What I'm going to do is I am going to label the bin, and I'm going to check in on it in about a week, which I would do anyways because the fast food will probably be gone by then. And while I'm doing another feed, I can check the castings and see how they feel to me as far as their siftability. And if they're ready to sift, then I'll be able to go ahead and sift. If I think more mitigation needs to be done, then depending on what I feel and see is going on in the bin, I can take additional actions if necessary. All right? So that's what I wanted to show you. I thank you very much for joining me tonight. I hope you will give me a thumbs up and like this video. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And otherwise, I remain yours in the dirt, Jane.